Well, hello everyone, and welcome to only the third ever C-Suite collab. For those who are tuned in and don't know me, my name is Dean Carroll, and I'm one of the co-founders of C-Suite. It's a startup aiming to provide a lifetime learning platform for executives and aspirants. Our collab series of virtual events are an extension of our web app, which you can check out at csuite.sg, and that's C-Suite with a hyphen. As a user, you'll be able to view what's happening in the app, and then if you like what you see, you can sign up as a paying member in order to participate in the community. There you'll find great content plus great connectivity. You can even engage in professional matching if you're looking for a mentor, co-founder, investor, board member, and so on. In addition to that, you can create your own content and become a thought leader while also benefiting from the other high-profile members sharing their knowledge. So, back to the matter in hand. Today, it's our pleasure to host a panel of 14 leadership experts. In very much a free-form manner, they and you in the audience together will explore the timely topic of becoming a better leader, how to turn management into leadership. We really want to see a two-way dialogue today, so please do get involved with questions from the floor and do vote in our online polls. This is not the traditional event structure. Therefore, as an audience member, you'll even be able to share your own best or worst practice leadership experiences, should you feel brave enough to do so. So to be in the mix, to get picked, please put one sentence in the chat box explaining the experience you'd like to share, and we will pick out the most interesting ones. You'll then have 1 minute to tell us your tale. We will then ask the panel for their thoughts on the story that you share. So before we start, just a quick housekeeping note to say that you can also submit your questions to the panel via the Q&A icon, and we will try to answer as many of them as we can today. Feel free to remain anonymous or leave your name and company there too if you'd like it to be name checked. In addition to that, you can obviously comment and talk to each other in the chat box, but we would just ask that you remain respectful and professional when doing so. Thank you. Now, let's get started. There are just too many bad managers or so-called leaders in the business world, all the way from the talented arsehole and the temperamental genius to the over-promoted drone, or worse still, the uncontrollable egotist. We've all experienced them at some point in our careers. In fact, some of us probably were one at a certain time. And the reason being that for many people, they're expected to know how to do it without receiving the tools to make it happen. So just how do you move from unconscious incompetence to being conscious of your shortcomings, to overcoming them consciously, and then to unconscious competence, whereby you are so skilled and experienced that leadership becomes second nature? For even if you're lucky enough to receive in-house training, complete an EMBA, and participate in high-level business education, it is clear that learning journey shouldn't stop there. This is most definitely a marathon, not a sprint. So hopefully this session can play a small part in helping people on the journey from management to leadership. So let's start with the Leadership Principles CEO, Gordon Treadgold. Gordon, you've written a lot about the damage that toxic bosses can do. What questions should leaders be asking themselves in order to establish their weaknesses and then better themselves, would you say?
So I've recently did a poll on LinkedIn asking people what, prior to landing their first leadership role, had they received coaching and mentoring or training or both prior to getting the job. And over 50%, I think it was 52%, said they received no training whatsoever before actually being given a leadership role. So I think one of the questions that we should be asking ourselves before we step in is, what can I do to be better prepared in order to lead an organization? I think a lot of times when we get these roles, we're basically what I would call an expert leader. We are an expert in data security, and we ended up getting to lead a data security team. So that allows us to be hands-on. And I think we have to ask ourselves, how good are our people skills? How good are we at understanding how to motivate and inspire people? And do we have that skill set? Because if you don't, then it's going to be potentially problematic for you when you get into that area. I remember my first day as a project manager for London Electricity, I was the expert on everything. And the test manager, and I'd previously been the test manager, said, "We have a problem. Can I speak to you in your office?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "What is it?" And she said, "I have a lump in my breast. I think it's cancer. What should I do?" I was like, "Oh, not a question." You know, it was at that point that I realized I was deeply unprepared. So I think that's what I would ask, you know, what training could I give myself? How good are my people skills? And how can I beef them up?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, shocking figures there, and a great point that you raise, and one I want to come back to actually later in the session. And thank you for that, Gordon. That's a great way to kick us off. And I'd like to bring in the Dentsu Asia Pacific CEO, Ashish Basan, if I may, at this point. Ashish, you've worked at Dentsu for 12, 13 years now, I think. And the stakes are pretty big, and the expectations are quite unforgiving at such a large organization as you know, a global agency network. So as a leader in that pressured environment, just how difficult is it to maintain that astronaut calm and empathy for your team at the same time?
Look, it's absolutely critical, particularly for our business, which is advertising. I think one of the key skills that a leader needs to have is resilience. No 2 days are alike. Almost anything that you think is going to happen just does not happen, and something else happens, and so on. So maintaining that calm while you're in the midst of a complete storm, I think is absolutely necessary, because somebody has to have their head on their shoulders to give the right direction. And that's true for most professions, but for something like advertising, which is so people oriented and such a deadline oriented business, it becomes even more incredibly important. And I think there comes a stage in your life. I mean, most people grow from bottom of the pyramid, and they have the life journey up, and we're actually trained to be good managers. If you've done an MBA and so on, you read a lot of books, and through your experience, you over the years become a good manager. But there's a big difference, to my mind, between being a good manager and to being a leader, because and I think the biggest difference is that a leader inspires, and a leader can only be a leader if he or she has followers, right? If you're a manager, then by definition, anybody who you're supposed to manage has to look up to you. That still doesn't make you a leader. And the hardest part for me personally, and I see it around for everybody, is to make that transition from being a very good, efficient manager to being a competent leader, which includes compassion, which includes empathy, which includes agile decision making, and 100 other things. And most importantly, it includes being inspirational for people.
Yes, absolutely. Leadership has to be earned, for sure, doesn't it? And Kyle Hegarty, the author, I know you work with a lot of MNC clients, and you've worked at MNCs as well in the past yourself. What would you say, which are pretty, on the face of it, are pretty well served in terms of leadership training and development. What would you say is the most transformative management or leadership technique you've been taught over the years?
I follow. Hello, everybody. So it's good to see everybody. Some familiar faces. I think that one of the things that I noticed, I was stalking some people who I thought were very effective leaders, and I was looking for those traits. And the one pattern that I found was that the best ones weren't really focused on their actual work or like a supervisory role at all. They were doing the soft stuff. They were handling the conversation that was brought up earlier that had nothing to do with work, but a medical condition. They were spending more time with people at lunch. They were doing things that were almost counterintuitive that anybody would be, what I think would be taught in a traditional way. And to me, it's a counterintuitive growth process to go through in order to get to that, where sometimes the most effective workday is one where you actually don't get work done in the traditional way that you might think about. So it's kind of switching that mindset from being a supervisor to those multiple hats of being a coach, of being a mentor, of being an advisor, of being a trainer. Those are the patterns that I'm seeing that I think are most important.
Most definitely, being mindful of relationships with your team, with the rest of the whole company and the leadership team is absolutely essential, isn't it? But sometimes it gets lost in the daily whirlwind of work, right? So you've really got to be mindful of putting the time in there. Yeah.
I would just add, that you've also have to be in some ways the bad guy. You've got to disappoint people, because sometimes what I was seeing with the people that were doing this really well in the MNCs was that they were pissing a lot of people off, and they were pissing a lot of people off up, not down. The people oftentimes focus on managing up, but what I was seeing is that the people that are the most respected, where the most trust is earned, is those who have that respect when it's on the way down, or from people underneath them from a hierarchy standpoint.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. And Elena Perella, who is a life coach for professionals, who's also joined us tonight. It's our pleasure to have you. Elena, what are the recurring problems for your clients that you help them to work on in order to become better leaders?
Well, at the core of it, there is only one reason, only one problem, and it is the internal baggage that we carry around. And this is something that we inherit from our parents, family, and the environment. This is what I call our family's toxic emotional inheritance. Yes, and it is a baggage, toxic baggage made of thoughts, beliefs, tendencies, ideas, internal conflicts, unresolved childhood issues that our parents pass on to us. And this is why the transition is difficult. The manager finds it difficult to transition into leadership.
And so is this the main focus of your work with the executives, unpacking?
Yes, because this is what I do. I help them identify those obstacles belonging to their family's toxic emotional inheritance, because this inheritance is at the foundation of many of our problems. Yes.
So it has to be worked through. If you ignore it at your peril, I guess.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
You ignore such things at your peril, I guess, in terms of
the peril. Sorry.
I was just saying that if you ignore these, the baggage that you talked about from your past, then you will pay for ignoring it, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. And Bernard de Schmidt is with us. He's an executive coach and author of Inside Out Leadership. Full disclosure, I was lucky enough to receive leadership training for a couple of years when working at Mumbrella from Bernard's. And Bernard, you are an advocate of techniques such as active listening, mutual-based learning, infectious positivity, and speaking your truth in a safe space in order to create those high-performing teams and, high-level leaders. But my question to you actually is, do all managers have the capability to change and become true leaders, or are some just beyond redemption?
Oh, gee whiz, Dean, where do I start? I guess what comes to mind listening to the question is that rhetorical question, are leaders made or born? Leaders are made. Let me declare my bias. Leaders are made. It just is so interesting listening to the perspectives, and I think we all come to this, in a different way, but we end up at the same place. What I would invite is, if we look at the distinction between management and leadership, and I think, in every leader there's a manager, but not every manager is a leader. And if we distill this, and these distinctions help until they don't, but from a management perspective, everything we do in managing leads to us getting a result. management is about the result. Leadership is about the relationship. And I see these as the two hands that wash each other. They are symbiotic. And I don't necessarily believe it's about turning managers into leaders. I think it's more about knowing when to turn to manage and when to turn to lead. So yeah, it's, you know, I'm often the question, and I'm sure I would have posed it to you, Dean, at some stage, and that is, why would others choose to be led by you? And I'm often amazed how difficult it is for leaders to answer that question. And when they do answer it, they typically default to, they follow me because of what I do. And we know that it's not to be true. We follow others because why they lead. So, you know, I think important when we look at from a leadership perspective is understanding what is that cause we serving greater than ourselves? What is the value we adding? What's the difference we make? For what sake have we chosen to lead? And you know, I so resonate with so many of the others, and it is about inspiring. It's about inspiring belief. You know, if we're going to expect followers to follow us, they've got to believe in what we believe.
So are you talking there, Bernard, about finding your why and getting others to...
about you know, when we leverage the work of Simon Sinek? Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, managers start from their what, leaders start from their why.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Good points. Okay, brilliant first section to kick us off with. Before we change topic, I want to ask the rest of the panel if there's anyone who wants to jump in with any thoughts, comments, insights, questions, things you disagree with or agree with strongly. Now's an opportunity to jump in before we move on to the next part of the discussion. Mette, I think you have your hand up there.
Absolutely. It's a topic that I'm very inspired by, this leaders being the ones who inspire. It's one of the things where I see a lot of leaders in my work, or a lot of employees, a lot of managers who don't dare to inspire. A mantra, a core mantra of our inspirational leadership work that we do is, you got to be inspired to inspire. If you're not inspired, how can you inspire others? And so many people want to be so professional at work, and it's almost dry and stiff. And that's not how you inspire. There must also be the human touch. You must also allow to show your passion. And it's very much about being also values driven, purpose driven. So the why from Simon Sinek, a lot of people, when they're looking for their own why, they're asking, what is my why? I don't know what my why is. And that's where you got to go a step deeper. It's about finding out, what are your personal core values? When you discover your personal core values, when you live by these on a daily basis, usually a purpose becomes clear after a while. And when you live by a purpose, that is when your passion is ignited. And that is when you have energy to do extraordinary things. And that is when you're inspired, and when you can also inspire other people. So that is those are my thoughts around being inspirational. You got to be inspired to inspire.
Yeah, absolutely. And finding your core values is not the natural domain of everyone, right? Some people need some help to be nudged in the right direction to discover those values. Yeah, I believe Glenn Van Zutphen has his hand up as well. Go ahead, Glenn.
Hi, Dane. Good evening, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. Nice to see all the speakers on, and the huge audience as well. So thank you for that. I agree with Mette. The inspiration is very important. The work that I do is around coaching around communication and helping C-suite particularly become more effective and more memorable communicators. And I think that all of the things that have been mentioned in the last few minutes are spot on. But if a leader doesn't know how to communicate with his team or her team, then a lot of the best intentions and all of these things can go south very quickly. So when I work with high performing executives, the first thing we always talk about is, not surprisingly, the audience, right? Knowing the audience, but having a great deal of empathy for that audience and really drilling down on what that means to them and their team or their stakeholders. And then also the ability to listen. And it's a bit cliche to say that, good speaking begins with listening, but it is very, very true. High performing leaders that are successful are the ones that actually do, frankly, the most listening and understanding of what people want from them and need from them before they bring in all these other great leadership elements that some of our other panelists have talked about tonight.
Yeah, 100% agree. Active listening is underrated as a skill set. Yeah. Okay. Before we change topic, let's ask what the audience thinks with our first poll question of the night. Panel members, you can vote as well. So the poll question is it possible for every manager to transform into a true leader if they put the work in? The possible answers are yes, no, and not sure. Please get voting now. Okay, and we'll give around 15 or 20 seconds. Okay. All right. So another 5 seconds, I would say. Vote now if you haven't already. Okay, Crystal, I think we will call it and bring up the results. So, is it possible for every manager to transform into a true leader if they put the work in? Overwhelmingly, 62% of you say yes, 29% say no, and 9% say not sure. Okay, I think that's probably the expected result, but it's good to have that confirmed. Okay. Before we move on, Andreas, I think you had your hand up, did you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so Andreas Foyazaki, I'm proud to have pronounced that correctly. Yeah. Fingers crossed. Who's a management consultancy, but like Ashish from Agency Land originally. So.
Yes, indeed. So it's good to be here, and it's good to be among absolutely great minds. And, before we started, I was thinking about the topic and leadership, and I truly made my notes. And it's amazing how everything is in there. There are two things that we didn't cover, and I want to put them on the table for the rest of the discussion today that I believe are very, very important. I've been in CEO roles all my life, and I finally decided to do my own advisory, and from my mistakes and from my successes to really advise others, right? And the two things that I see to be very difficult is humility and vulnerability. And these two, I do consider them to be two important elements of a great leader, because understanding where you stand and understanding where you're not good at and how to manage that and to be open about that can be extremely important. And when we manage downwards, when we talk about empathy and care, these two elements become extremely important. And these two elements also, from the work that I have done so far, I see them to be two of the most difficult to tackle. I am the leader, I am the top of the team. How can I be vulnerable and yet for people to see me still positively? How can I admit mistakes? How can I be humble if I'm at this position? It sounds simple, but it's not. So I just want to put these two on the table among a fantastic list of attributes that we talked about, because perhaps we need to touch upon them throughout the conversation today. What do we do with humility? How do we tackle and how do we become more vulnerable in order to become stronger and get off that stigma that vulnerability is a weakness, in fact, is a strength. So I just like to add these two there in a fantastic list already.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely correct. And team members actually buy into it when you admit your weaknesses and your vulnerabilities and show your human side. So I think we can all agree with that. Okay, just to say that throughout the night, you can jump in the chat box. What would be really helpful is whenever we have a poll question, if you feel inclined, those out there in the audience, please jump in the chat box. Tell us why you voted the way you did, if you feel that way inclined. And a gentle reminder for anyone out there who wants to share a best or worst practice leadership experience, please leave your one-sentence description in the chat box, and then if it sounds interesting, we'll call on you to do a quick 60-second presentation of that particular experience, and then we'll have a chat about it afterwards. Now, we have a number of coaches on the panel today, so I want to talk a bit about how people should identify the type of training they need and with who. So I think, Bernard, we might come back to you on this one again. You know, what would you say is the key to choosing the right training organization or individual to go with, beyond the obvious resources like business schools and, you know, executive coach referrals? If you are someone who's never experienced coaching before, or leadership training, how do you research it? How do you make the right choice?
A great question, Dean. My immediate sort of thought comes to never go with the person you're most comfortable with. Go with a coach that you feel is going to challenge you and stretch you, but you feel deeply cared and respected by. Yeah, you know, from a coaching perspective, and again, I totally legitimize there are very many different approaches to coaching, but what as a coach, my value, my offer is how do we help people become different observers of themselves, and that can be a quite a confronting and an uncomfortable situation and circumstance to face. But you know, I think giving oneself permission, and Andreas, you said so beautifully, how we make it safe for coachees to feel vulnerable, to feel supported, to feel safe bringing their truth. So I think, you know, often, and this is, it is a difficult situation, because organizations I work with, and, you know, there's that, the invariable sort of cattle run show and of coaches. But I think, you know, what, as from a coachee's perspective, I think it's important for them to feel that whoever they work with is someone who's going to take them to a point beyond which they would, you know, be obviously prepared to take themselves, but feel safe, feel vulnerable, and feel open to explore and become different observers of themselves.
I can attest to feeling that way during the leadership training with you, Bernard. Absolutely. And Mette Johansson, MetaMind training founder, did you have a strong view on this too?
I'm happy to pass on to the two hands that are raised there.
Okay, let's go with Dahlia first then. Dahlia Feltham.
Hi, hi everyone. So I spent 20 years as a senior leader in P&G and others, and then I did the twist to become a leadership trainer. And I think one of the key things, I mean, I'm building on Bernard, it's care and stretch. Those are the two key things. So there needs to be a psychological safety that you feel, you know, in the program, but there also needs to be a little bit of uncomfortableness where the coach or the training program stretches you beyond your comfort zone. That's when we grow, as we know. So, you know, I love Simon Sinek, and, you know, for me, he summarizes it when he says, you know, managers manage the business and leaders lead the people that manage the business. So the key really, and I just want to refer, the reason I raised the hand was to the poll, you know, that the whole notion is making sure that a person is not only delivering the business side of things, but also growing, you know, the people. And at Procter & Gamble, it was a very clear, you got a rating for building the business and a rating for building the people. And if you weren't one rated in both of them, you could not get promoted. And I was shocked that this is not common practice. And hence you get, high performing assholes that don't know to deal with people. So, I'm extending a little bit to the poll. Yes, anyone could be taught to lead if they have the motivation. So that's an important element, because there's some people that say, I don't care about people and nothing you will say, change that. And then, sorry, but that person cannot be trained to be a leader. And then back to this question, when we look at how to choose the right kind of leadership program, and I do everything from one-on-one coaching to big corporate happiness at work programs, there needs to be an association with the trainer, a feeling of care and shared experiences, and that you can learn something. And it's not just, someone that comes from the trenches a little bit. That's what my clients at least appreciate. But there's also a level of stretch where we make you feel uncomfortable. So those were my 2 cents on that. Thanks, Dean.
Stretch is essential, absolutely. Okay, let me bring in Ashish Basan again, Dentsu Asia Pacific CEO. Ashish, I think you said to me around 18 months ago, something like that, that you were embarking on some executive education at one of the Ivy League universities in the US. As the catalyst for that, did you identify a gap in your knowledge in certain areas? Or, was it just about getting the badge from Harvard Business School or whichever institution it was? What kind of nudged you towards pursuing that?
Well, it was Harvard Business School, and and the reason I wanted to get it was that it was actually an aspiration for many, many years. I just never got down to doing it. At some stage, I felt I was too old to do it. As it so happened, I couldn't do it last year or this year because of COVID. The course got postponed, and I'm still hoping to be. I'm holding on to my admission and still hoping to complete that course. But I think the big motivation from my point of view was, when you are a leader for several years, you fall into the comfort of an echo chamber. You start thinking you know it all because you've done that job for so many years and you've been reasonably successful on it and have been rising and so on. You start thinking you're smart. You're probably smarter than what you are, and you know it all. And I think the day you stop learning and the day you think you know it all is the day when your demise as a leader really starts. So I thought that would be a good way for me to learn more and to challenge myself. I think the biggest thing to me as a leader in today's environment, and remember today's environment is very different from what it was 18 months ago, is that we've got to unlearn fast enough before we relearn. Everything that I learned about advertising so I've been in this business for 33 years. Everything we learned in the previous 30 years is of very little use to me today. Right? Of course it is. I mean, I'm exaggerating. Of course, it helps build your ground ability and a lot of those things. But equally important is how do you unlearn what you've learned, relearn all the new things that you don't even know that may be happening or you're not even aware of on that sense, and to do that in an agile, real-time way. You don't have the luxury now to say that, okay, I'm going to take my time, I'm going to figure this out, and maybe over the next 5 years, I'm going to get the hang of it. Because if that's the approach, then you won't be a leader for 5 years on that. So to me, that really was the motivation why I wanted to do it.
Yeah, it's ongoing development is a lifetime journey, isn't it?
It definitely wasn't the badge, because I don't think I'm going to be looking for another job or wanting an extra line on my CV. So in my instance, that certainly was not the motivation. It just was something I wanted.
It was for the right reasons. Okay, great. Now let's ask a top headhunter, James Coe, founder of James Kenneth Coe Executive Search, what he thinks. James, when you are evaluating professionals and then putting them forwards for roles, just how important is executive education and leadership training and so on in terms of their credibility and attractiveness to employers?
Actually, that doesn't really come up from that point of view. I guess when I look at leaders in management roles and stuff, I look at what they bring to the table. So you obviously your hard skills, what they've achieved, but then also how do they inspire? Like we've all talked about it, inspire people and stuff. But I think leaders when you do an assessment, you have to practice what you preach. Like we can talk about all this and it's very academic, but do you actually on the floor at the job every day, do you practice what you preach? You know, and that can be assessed. You know, you talk to someone else who's in that organization, you can find out whether the person is really good or not so good. And I think the other thing too with leadership and stuff, you really need to take time to really understand your staff, all the way from a PA all the way up. And it takes a lot of time because there's so many kind of personalities in your organization, right? Some people get motivated by just saying, or get excited just because the boss said, hey, you did a good job, you know, something like that, you know. So it's kind of like, it depends, you know. Am I making sense here?
Yeah, you definitely are. Definitely are. Yeah, I mean, you know, the practical side, I have on the agenda for later in the session. So definitely, let's come back to that. And I'm glad you raised it. I want to go to a former headhunter now, who's an executive coach and a head of talent at a company as well. So Jean-Michel Wu. Jean-Michel, I'm really interested in your journey. You know how you decided to go to become an executive coach from the position of a recruiter, high-level recruiter, and now you're a head of talent at an organization as well. Could you tell us a bit about that journey, what motivated you, and you know where you're at now?
Luck, probably. I was very lucky to have stumbled into being a coach. I think it's a privilege and an honor to do that for people. Going back to being a headhunter, it's also an incredible challenge and an honor to do the same thing, because you get to know people so very well. When you work inside an internal company like WPP or the rest, you have access to a lot of people, and you're able to talk to them as individuals. And so I think what happened was, halfway through working in a large organization, I realized I wanted to be more honest and authentic and with the people around me, and to get to know those people better and to help those people develop. I think there's quite a few nods from some of the coaches that have been executives before, so they know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you discovered your why, as Bernard would say.
Yeah, and that was a really interesting time in my life, because how you discover your why is a bit like letting go of everything. So working when I was working as a headhunter, I was running a large business, and just deciding to let it all go, I think was a really interesting opportunity for me. And I was able to take 6 months off to really figure everything out. And what came out of it actually was, I always talk about it with people that I coach as well, which is you have this ability to, instead of actually focusing on things that you want to do, you let the world sort of come to you instead. So instead of you being like a lighthouse where you're constantly searching for something, you actually become a beacon and see what comes along instead. So again, I feel very privileged to have had that experience. And then, things just happened after that. So the coaching was, I think, a natural change for me. The coaching course that I was on sort of definitely put me on that road. But I was just saying, yeah.
It sounds like a book in the making, Jean-Michel. I look forward to reading it. It would be really great, actually, to hear from a business owner. So Evangeline Leong, Kobe Global Technologies CEO and founder. Perhaps you could map out for us where you stand on learning and development. What's the approach at your agency for you, for your leadership team, and your wider team as well?
Thank you for asking, Dean. So, well, I started the company, and it was all about, frantically getting things done, things set up, and then we grew to a size of, say, 5 to 6 people, and then it was still manageable. Everyone, just imagine the communication channel was just one to each of them reporting to me. And then we grew to a size where around 30 people, where there was a need to set up a more structured way. Unfortunately, there wasn't much learning or coach that I enjoyed. So I had to do lots of research, talking to lots of people, and then realized that, okay, communication gets a little bit haphazard. We got to set up certain processes and set up a middle management. So we've frantically put together things. It's been some years now. Pretty happy to say that we've got a decent management infrastructure. We've got teams around and departments around. But the process wasn't easy. Right now, we are in a stage where we are constantly training our management team to become better leaders, practicing empathy, connection. I really resonate to a lot of your sharing. I wrote down in my notes, managers start from their what, leaders start with their why and end with how. I really like it because just today I was going through another round of coaching with my team. And right now it's really when they were really good at their work, from taking charge to taking care of those people in charge. We're learning our way out. And it's just inspiring me that I haven't thought about actually having a coach. So it's just interesting that there should be someone on external checking out on blind spots. So just inspired by today's conversation so far.
Thank you for that, Evangeline. And that's actually a really good segue to my next question, actually, which is going to be to Eugene Sear, who's the Training Academy Chief Coach and Mindset Strategist. He's here with us tonight. Eugene, one question I wanted to ask you was about the profile of your clients, and the other coaches and the other panel members. After Eugene has spoken, feel free to pipe up on this too, because I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. But yeah, in terms of the profile of clients for training, for coaching and so on, MNCs obviously have it coming out of their ears. But for a startup or an SME, the cost and time associated with such coaching, it can be out of reach, can't it, for many?
Let me share a case study. Recently, there is a construction company. It is family run, not a listed company. And they struggled with the finances, to be very honest. So I creatively worked out what they would have to spend on other areas, like, for example, recruitment, constant turnover, and also on their sales. So a lot of people, they have silo mindset when it comes to budgeting, right? I mean, all of us here are experienced with this. So they have a recruitment budget, they have a training budget, they have a coaching budget, then they have a sales budget, maybe Salesforce or something like that. And I just sat down with the CFO and we looked at this whole thing. And I asked them a very simple question. If they recruited better, if they onboarded better, then wouldn't these other pieces would have huge savings? And therefore, I got my 12 months contract, and from a 2-day, very simple kind of training, it became a 12 months leadership coaching, and then it became even executive coaching for the CFO and the CEO. Yeah, so we just have to work together with our clients to see how we can be creative about it.
Okay. Jean-Michel, Bernard, either of you want to chip in on the profile of your clients? Is it widening the pool of companies and individuals that are engaging with coaching, or is it still quite restricted because of budgets and time constraints?
Sorry, go on.
Please, Jacques.
Well, I'm relatively new to coaching, so I can only say that I don't like working with companies. I work with only individuals. So I have that luxury of working with the C-level, and I think if they want to have coaching, then it's very useful. If they don't want to have coaching, there's no point trying to sell it to them. As someone said, that you don't know what you don't know. But I think the best people are the ones that really want to try and figure out that question themselves.
Yeah.
So that's my take.
Okay. Got it. And do these individuals, Jean-Michel, do they come from certain types of companies or certain sectors? What are you seeing?
Well, obviously, my background is only in marcoms and media, so they're all from that area. But it's interesting because some companies do want to pay, but most of the leaders that I work with, they actually just want to do it individually and by themselves. But I don't think, since even before the pandemic, there hasn't been a vested interest in any of the HR leaders to seek executive coaching on the company's behalf. I just don't see that. Maybe in other industries, I'm sure that's important, but not in ours.
Is that does your experience mirror that, Bernard?
Slightly different, and again, let me talk from an Australian landscape. I'm finding, it's across most industries. For example, just by way of example, I happen to work in the construction industry across the vertical, so multi-billion-dollar organizations to $20 million, all embarking on executive coaching. I think, it was Warren Buffett who said, the price is what you pay, the value is what you get. And I think it was Eugene, to your point, that, what would be the consequences of not making this investment? I think what, and this is a professional shift that's happened. Coaching now is firmly in the space of optimizing potential rather than a remedial intervention. Coaching, doesn't work when one's sort of abdicating responsibility to a coach to sort out a performance problem or whatever. But I think part of the retention strategy, the engagement strategy, the enabling others to become their best. We've driven Daniel Pink's work, mastery. We are all human becomings. We are all looking to learn and become more, and coaching is one of the modalities that I'm seeing, very much now part of the mainstream of a mode of learning at the senior and executive levels. It's seen as an integral part of, and in some regards, I think questions would be asked if one hadn't had a coaching relationship at some point in one's career.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Elena, you have your hand up, I believe.
Yes. Yeah, I wanted to say something about the poll. You asked the question, can a manager become a true leader by following good leadership training, right? And I voted no. I voted no because, in my opinion, a true leader is an individual who is born to be leader. And if you are born to be a leader, then you have presence. And presence is your essence. It is the reflection of an inner completeness. It is a reflection of a vision, of a sense of purpose, of a strong sense of identity. And these are things that you cannot learn. in a course through leadership training. This is why I voted no. And this doesn't mean that a manager cannot become a good leader. Of course, he can become a great leader, but a true leader is different. It's different.
Interesting perspective. Anyone on the panel that disagrees or agrees with that statement? Dalia, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, no, I think just I wanted to relate to something else, but you know, I have seen, and you know, actually my pride and joy as a leader myself in the organization has been the turnaround cases. Okay, and I had multiple direct reports that were like on the verge of being fired, and you know, lighting their fire and helping them, you know, find their northern star so that they want to give back to the organization has been, you know, a huge, and that's why I ended up focusing on that full time as a coach. So I think it's an interesting point that Elena, yeah, charisma is usually innate trait, but you know, you can improve leadership. And I had a, you know, leader who told me leadership training is a never-ending journey, right? So there's different level of leaderships that you need at different stages of your development. So I'm a big believer, otherwise I wouldn't be a coach, in the sense that yes, some of it is innate, but we can train ourselves to become better, to become happier, to find our purpose, to be more inspired ourselves. Okay, once we address the emotional baggage, the limiting beliefs that Elena was talking about before, I think that's important as well. So that's kind of on to Elena's point, but for your previous question and why I raised my hand. So I actually evolved from, I do one-on-one training, but I also do group training and also psychodynamic therapy and specializing in mental health. And I've seen, you know, everyone, right, is talking the importance of resilience training, happiness at work. So I teach at SMU happiness and suffering, and that's kind of where my passion lies, because I have seen that we can teach ourselves to build resilience, we can teach ourselves to be happier. And I heard recently that, you know, we all know the stress and the mental anxiety. 1 in 4 feel work-related anxiety even before COVID, and COVID, you know, increased that significantly. So any leader that's not investing currently in coaching, training, and mental health education should ask themselves if they're really leading. And I am happy to see that even I'm working with some of the big techs, even the big techs that have the established leadership programs are looking more into the area of what is mental health, what is wellness, what is self-leadership? Because my big belief is that you cannot be a leader of others if you don't know to lead yourself. So to your question, I do see the profile not changing per se, but I do see a much broader interest in self-leadership, mental health leadership, everything that enables us as leaders to lead ourselves and hence lead others. So 2 parts of that answer.
Very comprehensive.
May I say a clarification? Yeah. So thank you, Dalia, for sharing your view. And you talked about charisma, but I talked about presence, and these are 2 different things. Because presence, you are born with it. Charisma, you can learn it. It's like that. It is if a presence is the metal, and charisma is the sheen of the metal, the brilliance of the metal. You know, and charisma and lead and presence don't need to go hand in hand. You can have it both. You can have them both or not. But if you have presence, in my opinion, you are a true leader. Charismatic leaders, charisma is more something like it's an outer image, right? And if you are charismatic, you can persuade people. You can how can I say? Well, everything depends on you. The energy in the room is your energy that makes everything rising up. While presence is different because it doesn't make you dependent. It makes you independent. While a charismatic leader makes you dependent on him.
Gordon,
and I think that.
I think Gordon wants to respond there. Gordon,
Yeah.
I see your hand up. Gordon, you're on mute.
I actually went on a 4-day course of leading with presence, and I watched an English actor give 12 people we had the collective presence of a dead rat. And at the end of that week, every single person was able to step onto a stage and by using the right stance, the right tone, taking the time to repeat things, say them not once, but twice, and he created presence. And it's absolutely easy to learn, but you've just got to go and do it. I think there's too much, leadership. Leaders are born. The only answer I've got to that is bullshit. Where are these people? I think the fact that when people say leadership is born, I think that is an archaic approach for the ruling class to say, you can't be one of us because you weren't born into it. All of the leadership skills can be learned. And if they can't, I have no clue why companies are spending $366 billion per annum on leadership. I don't understand why I've coached and trained dozens, hundreds of people to be better leaders. Sorry. And as for charisma, don't even get me started on that. I have seen so many charismatic leaders crash and burn because you need to have both leadership and management. It's great to be able to set the vision, but you've got to be able to deliver on it. And I've seen dozens of people that have persuaded people, hey, let's fly and land on the sun. Yeah, great. Boom, failure. So sorry, I appreciate I might be a little bit harsh, but it can be learned. Presence can be learned. Charisma, great if you've got it, but not a killer if you don't. Again, there's lots of books on how to learn to be charismatic. I've read two of them and learned and improved my own charisma. Obviously not demonstrating any of it at this moment in time, but it can be learned. It can absolutely be learned.
Yeah, well, some would argue that Donald Trump was a charismatic leader with presence, and look where that went. But anyway,
Donald Trump is a phenomenal leader. Donald Trump's a phenomenal leader. It's what he did with that leadership that was questionable.
Yeah, it was the substance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we change topic, then let's ask the audience what the audience thinks with our next poll question of the night. And the poll question is, how important is executive coaching in terms of individual, company, and cultural growth for leaders? Is it a top priority, a low priority, or not a priority at all? Please do get voting. We'll give around 15 to 20 seconds for that. So please do get voting now. Panel members, you can also vote. Please do participate.
Dean, I have to wonder what the panel's going to vote on that one. Big mystery.
Do we vote?
You never know. You never know. There are some contrarian views. So I think we'll call it there, Crystal.
Dean, do we vote from what we believe or what we see organizations doing? Because these are two different things.
No, what you believe. What you believe, yeah. So we have the result. How important is executive coaching in terms of individual, company, and cultural growth for leaders? 83% say a top priority, 14% say a low priority, only 3% not a priority at all. So there you go, the coaches and trainers on the panel. It looks like you've got some business coming your way after tonight. So thank you for that. All right, so again, whichever way you voted, please feel free to jump in the chat box there and tell us why you voted the way you did. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. How are we doing on the audience wanting to share best or worst practice leadership experiences? Please leave your one-sentence description in the chat box if you'd like to participate. We'll then give you 60 seconds to do so. Take your chance right now in front of this awesome panel. It's a golden opportunity. and we will keep an eye on that. Okay, so far we've talked a great deal about the possibilities opened up by training and coaching. We haven't talked a great deal, however, about what you can learn from failure and negative workplace experiences that arguably boost your knowledge and prepare you to do better next time around when faced with similar circumstances. So let's ask the panel for their views here, and let's kick off with the Kobe founder, Evangeline Leong. Evangeline, what has been your biggest failure or negative professional experience? And looking back with hindsight, did that nadir provide a springboard to greater things?
Well, there are so many that I cannot think of one specific one to share. But two came to mind when you're asking about this, and I think it relates well to today's topic. The first one is that I think in the first year of our business, so our business is in influencer marketing. We have a patented technology that helps to profile influencers better and deliver better efficiency and accuracy to our clients, report and all that. So it's tech-enabled company, but I can't write a single piece of code. I am not a tech person at all. So we had to build it up from scratch, put together some vendors, tried to ask for government grants and all that. So one fine day, there was a gentleman who came knocking on my door and saying that, hey, I'm a tech expert. Let's join hands and I'm going to build the tech for you. And just focus on the business and whatever you enjoy doing, like the marketing aspect and the sales. And so I did. But a couple of months down the road, he said, I'm not happy working with you. So I'd like you to compensate me $75,000 worth of 2 months work. Otherwise, I'm going to take away the technology that I've built for the past 2 months, or expect a lawyer letter to come your way. That was quite devastating for me. It ended off thankfully well, that we received the lawyer letter in the end, because I was in no position to afford $75,000 for a 2-month work. And we were entirely bootstrapped. So we wrote back a legal letter and he backed off. So thankfully for us, it's that. I think on hindsight, many learning lessons. I think clarity in the communication, not being afraid to take on difficult conversations. I think there were a lot of obvious cracks already along the 2 months. It didn't happen overnight at the end of the 2 months. There were obvious cracks, but because I was so blinded by the potential of someone actually settling all this technology stuff for me, I was greedy for it and I refused to take on that difficult conversation that could end up losing this person altogether. And so the cracks widened till that day. So one thing I learned is that authenticity starts from day one, communicating starts from day one. And if I'm not authentic, he will not be, and things would just burst. And it ended up pretty dramatically. So I think this would be one key thing that I like to learn, and that huge lesson learned. Yeah.
That sounds like it was definitely a lesson learned. Okay. Dahlia, your Flow Leadership Consulting founder and Singapore Management University adjunct professor. I know your TED talk on overcoming sexist experiences in the workplace grabbed hearts and minds somewhat. Perhaps you could tell us how you turned that negative into a positive.
So thank you, Dean. Yeah, I mean, I ended up talking about it. I guess that was, but I think it's an interesting leadership experience. So I started off, as I mentioned, at Procter & Gamble, and not telling the whole story, but, I 6 months into the business was called into my general manager's office because one of my launches hit a wall, and I was so frustrated with it that I started tearing up. And I was super embarrassed. And my boss, Jim, offered me a box of tissues. And then he told me, Dahlia, if you're ever embarrassed about crying in the office again, don't ever be embarrassed about crying in the office again, because it's a sign of your passion. And passion is your superpower. And if you ever work with someone that doesn't appreciate that, walk away. They don't deserve you. And for me, that was an amazing positive experience, right? Because, you know, I was empowered for 17 years to lead like myself. And not that it's crying in the office every day. I don't think I've done it since, but just that I was allowed, given the permission to be human. And as a result, you know, I delivered the moon for those leaders. But then 17 years later, I moved to another assignment and I was CMO for Total Asia in a great company. But I had a manager who was low on EQ, that's all I can say. You know, I was once in his office and he just was berating me. Now, I love feedback, right? We call it tough love. It comes from a position of care, you embrace it. But in this case, there was no love. It was just really humiliating, very personal. And then it went to my team and humiliating my team. And that's when I became a little bit of a lioness. And I was so frustrated that suddenly I started tearing up. Now I'm a C-suite woman, right? So my boss smiles and offers me a box of tissues. And, you know, for a moment I had this warm, fuzzy feeling, remembering my first boss. And then I realized something weird in his smile and he turned around that tissue box that he offered me. And on the other side, he had a handmade sticker he prepared in advance that read Dalia's tissue box. So he was prepared in advance to play this silly joke. And I was like, are you kidding? This is an HR assault. And he's like, oh, Dalia, stop being so emotional. It's, you know, it's just boy banter. I know you have a sense of humor, right? And that was my pivot moment. You know, I'm a feisty little girl, okay? I'm not a shy, so I stayed for 3 years. You know, first year I was trying to kind of fight and give feedback, and I learned you can't change someone that doesn't want to change. And that's, I think, very important, because in my heart, I'm a coach. I've always been a manager and a coach. And I thought I can coach him, and I realized you can't coach someone that doesn't have the motivation. And that's a very important point. So, you know, second year, I just shut up and did whatever I was told in a way. But I ended up falling sick because I left my heart and my art in the door. So third year, I decided to drop the fear and really create, you know, he wanted science, I wanted art. We created the campaign that was very, you know, science-based, but also very creative. And then I decided to leave. When I was, you know, when I was able to get back to my strengths and, you know, my superpowers in that sense and deliver, that's when I decided to leave. And I can tell you this, the Tale of Two Cities, that was my inspiration to go and study it. How come in one company I was a rock star and in the other one, maybe they thought I performed, but I gave them 15% of my capacity at best. And, you know, that's when I grew up in a great culture, and that's when I realized the importance of culture, the importance of great leadership. You only really appreciate it when you happen to fall on a leader that's not a great leader. And I think I learned, I hate saying that, you know, because I don't wish suffering like that on anyone, but those were 3 years of kind of, that was just one story. It was 3 years of constant work office abuse. And I learned that it's very common. And we're here in Asia, sadly, almost 1 in 2 people in the workplace experience work-related abuse. It's insane numbers, right? And I think it's all of us, our role. I mean, leadership is, that's why I mentioned upfront that these, how Adam Grant calls them the magnificent arsehole, right? These high performing but low EI leaders, they cannot, we must not allow them to get promoted. And I think that's the responsibility of everyone in the organization. And that's a little bit to Elena's point that, yeah, you can train leadership. That's why we are all in business. And I totally agree with Gordon, right? I'm a big believer, I'm an optimist that you can turn every person better, but they need to have the motivation for it. Someone has been succeeded without having people skills, and they say, this has worked for me in the past, so why should I change? Those are the people you cannot change.
Dalia, I'm sorry to hear you went through that, but I really thank you for sharing your experience with us. I'm sure it's touched a lot of people's hearts And, you know, these negatives can and do lead to positives as well. So thank you very much for that. And I think Gordon has his hand up and wants to respond. Gordon, you're on mute.
I'll lower my hand. I didn't see it was still up.
Ah, okay. Okay.
But I agree with Dali. You know, I do think leaders are made, not born, but that doesn't mean everybody can be a leader. And there's a lot that actually don't want to be a leader either. I'm happy to be involved, but you know, don't push me to the front. Let me just stay, you know, back comfortably in the pack. But there are some that should definitely not be given the opportunity to lead. And unfortunately, sometimes those are the people that generate results. And we end up with that toxic asshole that at the end justifies the means. And they hope that we'll just put up with it until they either get better or we all quit.
Yeah, but it's normally the whole culture has a problem when that happens, right? Because these people don't emerge, you know, without support. So it's normally an organizational problem, isn't it?
Yeah, I did some work for the British government, and you know, there was one guy, and I knew we were going to have problems because he brought me on to be his deputy. And in the first 15 minutes, he said, "I'm glad you've joined because everybody else in the company is an asshole." And I thought, oh boy, how long before I'm in that group?
Yeah.
And he was without doubt the biggest. And I mentioned it to, you know, one of the, you know, very senior people in the Home Office, and they just said, "But we need him." And I thought, but you think that because he keeps telling you you need him. If you got rid of him, productivity would jump 20% that very day. Yeah, 20%. But they were scared to death. Scared to death.
And change is a difficult thing as well, isn't it?
As a change management expert, no. But yeah,
most people are not.
People don't like it. That's true. But we just have to put it in terms that, you know, when you get people excited, nothing is impossible.
Okay, great. Dalia, do come back.
No, I just wanted to chime in with the amazing research that I saw from Adam Grant the other week, that the cost of getting rid, you know, the cost of keeping a negative, toxic leader is 3 times higher than all the training. So in that sense, I mean, this is my biggest cry for management. You either turn them into people, you know, teach them empathy, turn them into people developers, or they have to stay at manager level. Otherwise, the cost of one rotten apple is huge. So that's kind of really turned around and I'll tell you just one more thing. When I started teaching at the university, very briefly, I started teaching, and my first workshop is Find Your Why. And these are students, 22 years old. And one of them stood up and said, "Prof, I know what my purpose is now, but I know I need to be a corporate slave for a few years, and then I'll do what I love." And I can tell you that moment is my pivot moment, where I decided to go back into the lion's den, into the corporate world, and help managers find their own purpose and bring their full self, because I know it doesn't have to be that way. 17 years in P&G, I was in complete flow, and that's why I called my company Flow Leadership. But we have to, you know, be ruthless, sorry to say, on outrooting kind of managers that don't have people skills.
Agreed. Andreas, I think you had your hand up, and then we'll go to Elena, who also has her hand up. Andreas?
Yeah, it's this discussion is fascinating, and my question is really not question, but a point to raise. The challenge comes where you don't know what you don't know, and who is in charge to make that decision. And so you have, let's say, in the local market, a leader of the organization who's not doing it right, but he controls the discussion with the HQ, and therefore the numbers perform, or you make them to perform. However, the people are unhappy and they stay there because of circumstances. That's another story. But my point is that this person holds that discussion with HQ. HQ doesn't know. There is not a system or a process where the leader himself or herself would be evaluated. And therefore you have that frustration. Somebody has to make that decision that this person needs a coach or to be removed. And that's where I see a very, very big challenge to be. Because if you are that CEO and you are oblivious to what you're doing, you don't know what you don't know. That might not even be intentional on your style. So who is going to make the penny to drop? And who is going to push you to move from the frame of unconscious incompetence to the frame of conscious incompetence, where the journey starts, and you're going to get some help.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question of systems and culture, isn't it? Absolutely. Right. Elena, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I'd like to say something about a thing that Gordon was said before, and Gordon, correct me if I'm wrong. I heard that you were saying that leadership passes unseen. And I'd like to say that often it is because these people, that leaders pass unseen, that you cannot see that a person is a leader. You said something about that, right?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Sorry, then I'm wrong.
Okay.
But I can add. So that's okay.
No problem.
No problem.
Sometimes leaders go unseen.
Yeah. Well, it's a point to say that they go unseen because they have their family's toxic emotional inheritance that functions as a cloud, on their presence. And this is why people do not recognize a leader. And this is point one. Another thing that I'd like to mention is about toxic leaders. There are two categories. There are leaders who are toxic and they cannot change. And there are those who have toxic elements, inherited toxic elements, and those can change. But often they don't know that they have toxic elements. So this is why they continue to behave in a toxic way. And I think that in leadership training, this is not mentioned. Right? So they learn skills or how to improve their skills, but they don't know why they can't perform at such a high level and naturally. Because if you are a true leader, then you can perform naturally and at a very high level, but you are sabotaged, you are forced to sabotage yourself because of those toxic elements. So.
Okay, I want to move things along and ask Kyle Hegarty, the author of The Accidental Business Nomad and Managing Director of TSL Marketing. Kyle, do you think adversity in your career teaches you valuable lessons, or is learning through resilience overrated?
Oh, no, you've got to continually screw up and fail to get anything done. There's so many different great quotes about planes only take off when the wind's against them and the like. I think it's very hard for people who have gone through, in fact, maybe it's controversial, but I think people who have gone through an economy that's constantly growing, who have never experienced a recession, or an industry that's never gone through this. Obviously, I think COVID's probably an outlier, but I think that without downturns, without challenges, it's very difficult to learn and grow fast. From a sales standpoint, I'm pretty much a salesperson. This will sound bad. We don't hire people from companies that are just, I won't name them, but like the companies that are just killing it. I would never hire a salesperson from those companies because it's a totally different experience in terms of what they go through versus what probably 90 8% of the other companies out there go through. I'm much more interested in talking to a sales rep or somebody who has, had to hustle and really struggle through this to succeed, rather than somebody who has been smart enough. And there's nothing against the top tiered companies, but it's a very different experience. So I would very strongly take the position of going through adversity.
Yeah, you need those punch in the face moments along the way, right, to toughen you up. Okay, listen, we've got some really good questions coming in now from the audience, and I'll go to a couple of those in a second. But Gordon, did you have your hand up again there, or was that by accident?
No, I did have my hand up. I just wanted to mention one thing that happened to me. I worked at a company where I helped them. They wanted to save 210, and I helped them save 350 million. And I was actually eased out of that company, and a lot of that was to do with the fact that the inherent management style was command and control, and my leadership style is very, very people oriented. And every year I got praised for the results and criticized for the leadership, and asked, why can you not do what you do in a command and control, or in a command and control way? And the reality was, the other people did not want to change to lead the way that I was leading, because they felt uncomfortable, because it involved them getting much more personally connected with people and involved. And rather than adapt, they ended up offering me an option where they just gave me enough money to say, thanks, I'm done with this. But it was the other managers who just, they wanted to retain the status quo of command and control leadership. And it wasn't toxic per se, but it was not, it didn't encourage people to grow and get the best out of them. It was just meh. And they were happy to survive and lead in a company like that, which I found, I was stunned that the other leaders would trade great performance for, I can just continue to lead the way I lead.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting experience and insight as well. So thank you for that. I do want to jump to a couple of the audience questions now, and anyone on the panel can respond to these. So please do jump in as you see fit. So Simon Kearney says, beyond the generic qualities or soft skills that we all understand about great leaders, what are some of the hard skills of leaders? I mean, decision-making ability, or ability to make unpopular decisions, or stand up for something. And that's a really good question, and a bit different to the elements we've discussed so far tonight. Did anyone on the panel want to respond to that?
Yeah.
Go for it, Bernard.
Yeah. Dean, it's interesting when we talk about the so-called soft skills, because those are the hard skills. And I think, far more important than, knowledge or technical ability that a leader brings is what I would regard as four of the most essential skills. And let's not look to the distinction on hard and soft, but the most essential skills of a leader would be, their determination, their belief, the capacity to be absolutely determined in the fulfillment of a goal and objective, not blindly, stubbornly going through this, but in a very, very compelling, convincing way. The intuition, is a very hard skill. Intuition, the ability to make decisions in the absence of fullness of understanding, is a critical skill. Now, whether we call that a hard or a soft skill, it's essential. The judgment one brings. Curiosity is a very, very essential skill. It's being open to unlearn. I think to your point, Ashish, is how open are we to unlearn? How open are we to observe ourselves? And the the engagement, the capacity to have these conversations, these so-called difficult conversations with humility and vulnerability. You know, I would trump those skills above all else. Got it. That's a really great answer. And I want to bring in Melody Rawlings, who's North Central University Center for the Advancement of Virtual Organizations Director in the US. Melody's with us tonight. Melody, do you feel the students at your institutions, who are in effect the leaders of tomorrow, are they well prepared for the leadership challenges and failures they will face in the workplace in the years to come?
Hello, everyone. It's good to see all of you. I think that's kind of a mixed bag. So I think some of them will be and some of them are, because we are an fully online graduate school. So I work as a virtual team member. We have students all around the world, and they are already working professionals, many of them. And so, you know, they're coming to further their education through master's or doctoral program. And getting to this question, if I could answer this question. So I see adaptability as really important. So a leader being able to adapt to the situation, not only to the situation, but to the particular employee, being able to adapt their leadership style, whether that would be very directive or more of a shared leadership. So I think the leader has to know themselves really well to be able to do that. And they also have to know the employee that they're dealing with, or the situation they're dealing with, to be able to do that. So we do try to train our students to, you know, through best business practices, through emerging trends, what's going on. We have a unique model. We have a one-to-one coaching model with our students. So rather than the traditional classroom of, you know, 30 students or more, we have a one-to-one model. So each student has a faculty mentor coach. And so we are leading by example. Everyone has business experience that's teaching for us. Everyone has an advanced degree, a PhD that's teaching for us, which again, I'm not saying that education trumps experience, it does not. So I recognize that experience is vital. So in answer to your question, yes. So I think many of our students are. I'm sure that not all of them are. So that's what we hope to give them, is to build on experience that they already have as working professionals, and so that they are prepared to meet those challenges.
That's good. You're setting the foundations in place. Glad to hear that. Okay, I'm going to take one more question from the audience here. Glenn Van Soofen, prepare to answer this one if you can. Anonymous attendee says, I came across inspiring leaders, yet their directions are too broad and vague. The team is lost on what is exactly to do, what actionable things to do based on the general feedback. I think we've all kind of experienced that in the workplace, right? You sometimes come across leaders that are complete visionaries. They get the juices flowing, they get you excited, stimulated with their grand plan, but the clarity and consistency on the execution is not always there. Thoughts, Glenn?
Thanks, Dean. From a communication standpoint, probably the biggest challenge that I see with C-suite leaders is, and this may sound funny, they know too much. So they know too much about their business, about their industry, and that leads to them typically saying too much and not having the ability to self-edit and to really consider what the specific audience that in front of them needs or wants to hear. And so, as you can imagine, they go from talking about this much, which they should talk about, to talking about this much, talking about 80 or 90% of what they know about, rather than 10 or 15% that's appropriate to a particular audience. So I absolutely hear what that person is asking, and it is a massive problem. We see it on interviews, media interviews, TV, radio interviews, on podcasts all the time. Leaders that are brilliant, but they just don't know how to focus their comments to affect an outcome or to be memorable or remembered. And before you know it, the topic or the saying we use here in Singapore, they're out of bounds, right? Their OB markers they're way past their OB markers. This is a real challenge, and one that we work very hard with executives in a coaching scenario to make sure they understand how to self-limit what they're saying so that it's absolutely appropriate to the audience.
Is there an element there of leaders not reading the room and not engaging with their audience and giving their audience what it needs, rather than, you know, focusing on their own messaging?
To be sure, and this is, look, you look at, and I won't just blame PR people, but you look at the typical communication function or public relations function that is supporting an executive, and what do? They push out a press release on a new product, initiative, service, whatever it is, and without even considering who the journalist is, let's say, in this case, they just pump it out to their media list of 100 people. Dear journalist, dear editor, dear so-and-so. And so from the very beginning, it's a push message. It's not a message from understanding what the audience needs to learn from or wants to learn from. And this then, follows on to the executive or the spokesperson in many cases, where they adopt that as well. They are there to talk about something. They are there to push their story, their agenda, their whatever, but without really taking into consideration who's on the listening end of things. And that can happen in the town hall meeting within the organization. It can happen one-on-one or a small team, or it can happen to 500 people at Marina Bay Sands at a conference for the industry. So it can happen and does happen all the time.
Yeah, agreed. Ashish Basan, did you want to chip in perhaps on, the failures in your career that made you stronger, or those particularly low moments that enabled you to break through to something new?
Look, I can write a book on it, and perhaps will one day. I mean, of course, you learn from every failure, but I think the one which I learned the most from is that you start thinking that everybody is like you, and you sometimes miss out. And in today's world, that's very important. The cultural differences, the regional differences, the market differences, that prevail in different cultures. So let's say I'm very familiar with something that has worked in Singapore for me. I can't just assume that the same solution will work for me in Thailand, or the same solution will work in India, or same solution will work in Vietnam. And not once, but 100 times, I've thought this is a great idea. And I look after APAC, Asia Pacific, and I've said, okay, look, this is really working well out here. Now let me try and make it work in 17 of my markets. And not once, but 100 times I've realized that, but I still don't learn that it's just not necessary that it will work in the same way in those markets. So I think one of the big things that this kind of failure has taught me is that as a leader, you've got to have a different solution for the same problem, for different circumstances, for different human beings, for different markets, for different scenarios. And therefore, it's an infinite kind of permutation and combinations that you have to be prepared to experiment with and to dish out, and never push your views that, I know this is the right way because I've done it and it has worked for me. To me, I think I've learned that lesson several times without really learning it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, was there anyone else on the panel who wanted to chime in on this topic before we move forwards?
We're still on the what leaders need to know.
No, we're talking really about what you can learn from failure and adversity, if anything at all.
So yeah, so I did write a book on that, and I would say that for me, the thing that I learned from that, and it's the number one thing that I'd like to teach any leader, and that is the power of simplification. Too often we fail because we've overcomplicated it, and if we could just teach people to do things simpler and to be able to simplify, it would make the world a better place. Simplification leads to empowerment. Empowered people become excited people deliver. It is as simple as that. but simple is not easy.
But it isn't complexity created often because it's a place for charlatans to hide as well?
Yeah, I often say that process is the last hiding place of the inept. And I think complexity is also similar. And I think as well, you know, I can make things complex to protect my own revenue because I'm the only one that understands it. But I think sometimes it's not even that. It's just we have an inbuilt tendency to make things more complex, to think that complex solutions require complex problems, and we overlook simple solutions time and time again.
Yeah, agreed.
It was Stephen Covey who said on the other side of complexity lies simplicity, and how do we help move through those complexity to come to the elegance of not the simplistic, but the simplicity of the situation. Yeah.
Dean, could I just add about failure in terms of not necessarily leadership, but hiring? I think that with all of the change that's happening, I think that one of the things that I found in my own company and advising others is people who have failed, and that means even from like a scholastic education standpoint, my experience has been that sometimes the losers have turned into be the best successful employees that I've ever had. The people that in some parts of the world who were absolutely rejected because they weren't on the top of the dean's list and the top schools. One of the bits of advice that I give is actually flip over the grade point averages and actually go to the opposite, because it's the people that have failed in that regard who have actually overcome more adversity, who have actually been used to failing, who aren't good at memorizing tests. Oftentimes their skill sets are exactly what we need these days. So I think people from a hiring standpoint need to think about that. I think it's a cool opportunity. And I think that there's a lot of talent that's right in front of us that we are probably just overlooking.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
I was on a panel in the US a few months ago, and the whole discussion was about how is it that there are so many Indians who are leaders of organizations in the United States. It was done by an Indian community, and therefore that question had come in. And the general consensus of that panel was that, and here's how adversity can sometimes be a positive, that people, for example, in India, are used to working in so much of constraints in such a competitive manner, right from their nursery class, they're probably fighting for a seat and something, and they're always working against an infrastructure that when you pull them out of India and put them in a market like US, for example, where everything works, a lot of resources available in it, they just naturally shine because they've been trained in such limited resources in such an adverse manner. So I think for a leader, sometimes an adversity can really become a great learning place and a big strength if you look at it the other way.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think that makes me think back to my time in the Middle East, and how the Lebanese were leading almost every industry across the Middle East, right? And precisely for those reasons, because back home they face such challenges and adversity that they have to be so inventive and so creative to navigate the system. So it unlocks new pathways in the brain. Interesting. Okay, let's ask the audience what they think with what I think is our final poll question of the night. The question is it necessary to experience failures and adversity in order to become a great leader? The possible answers are yes, no, not sure, and we'll give you precisely 15 seconds, or approximately rather. So get voting. All right, 5 more seconds and then we will call it.
Easy questions, Dean.
Okay, go for it, Crystal. Let's see how easy it is. Let's see the result there. Okay, so maybe not that easy. Only 62% say yes.
Wow.
27, I thought it would be higher, genuinely. 27% say no. And 12% say not sure. Okay, that's a very interesting result. All right. Yes, is that Jean-Michel? Yeah. You're on mute, Jean-Michel, if you're speaking.
Thanks, Steve. I was just saying the idea of grit, which is this thing that a book that Angela Duckworth had recently wrote, which is all around that kind of aptitude and attitude. As a recruiter, you know, because I've been doing it for 20 odd years, if I could bottle that, if I could measure that, that would probably be, you know, a superpower. Because I agree 100% with everyone saying, which is really around having a senior leader put into a place, that's being recruited into a position and not doing a great job. Although everything in terms of the background and experience was you know, kind of said it's a dead cert. It wasn't, it clearly isn't. So it's very, very hard. It's an art. I always call it an art and a science when you recruit somebody. You really do need to get to know that person very, very well. And not just that person, but the people around that person, right? Who, you know, who's worked with that person before and seen what that person's like. And I think too many times, how the recruitment has been done, it's just done too quickly, and it's not been well thought out. And that's where you get into these situations when you've got a leader that can sort of slip through and be quite archaic.
I've heard it said, Jean-Michel, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about the statement, but I'd be interested to get your view on it. I've heard senior execs say that they live by the doctrine of slow to hire and quick to fire. What are your thoughts on that one?
My headphones aren't working.
Can you hear me now?
Hear you now. Sorry, what were you saying?
Yes, so I've heard senior executives talk about how they live by the doctrine of slow to hire and quick to fire. What's your view on that strategy?
I don't like those sayings anyway, but I think I do think it's like courting. You know, you get to know that person, and you find out as much as possible before you make a decision, which is potentially going to drive a business up or drive a business down. So obviously, I find recruitment and executive recruitment is the most important thing. I wouldn't have devoted 25 years of my life to it, but I genuinely do believe if you find the right people to do a great job, you need to figure out what is it that person needs to do. You know, what is, you know, and does that person have capability? And it's a very difficult thing. You don't know what's in it. So it's like a constant game, but you get better through time, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure. And James Coe, without giving away your business model, how do you find the grit in your candidates?
I think that's really important to have, and I agree with Jean-Michel. If you can bottle that, that would be a superpower to anyone. I mean, the world right now is in turmoil. It's unbalanced. It's, you know, unprecedented. You know, it's hard all around. Every job is difficult. And every employer is looking for someone that can hit the ground running from day one. You know, if you're a good time manager, you're going to find it tough trying to do work now, because in every situation, your teams are you might have less people in your team. You have to, you know, do the work as well. You know, very senior roles, you might have to do the strategy and the execution. So it's a different sort of person that is needed in the workplace right now. And to your statement, which is slow to hire and quick to fire, I think that is, you're slow to hire because you need to be really careful. If you get the wrong person in, and it doesn't matter whether it's at junior level or at senior level, you know, if the person's toxic, or, you know, disrupts the team dynamics, that will cost you your business. And it takes harder to get, you know, someone out of an organization. I mean, for example, in Japan, if you have someone, like in some countries, if you hire someone wrongly, it takes a lot of work to try and get that person out. And that could affect your bottom line, that could affect the morale of existing staff, you know, and problems just go on and on. So I would say slow to hire is to be careful. But when you talk about quick to fire, I think that really depends on why that person is going to be let go. If the person's toxic and it affects, you know, in staffing and general, then yes, you know, if it's misappropriation of funds, you know, again, it depends on why the person's getting fired. But if the person can be trained or their performance can be improved, then you might want to try and keep that person and see whether you can improve that person's performance, and don't be so quick to fire in that case. Yeah. So I think it's really dependent on why you want to fire a person.
Yeah, and if the problem is with the person who's about to do the firing, then you're really in trouble. Yeah. Okay. Dahlia has her hand up, and then Gordon too. So we'll go to Dahlia first, and then Gordon.
Yeah, I guess I'll go quick. I mean, two key points on the failure question. It was quite interesting, actually, that it got me thinking as a positive psychologist on the approach of strengths versus weaknesses. Same, I think, is for success and failures. So our failures help build resilience and maybe give us the drive, the hunger, right? But we do need our successes and learning from our successes to thrive. So I think, you know, it's an interesting kind of dynamic. It's not as obvious. So we do need, you know, as we know with strength-based leadership and focusing on your strength. But I did want to just relate to something said before by Andreas, because I think it's really important. Andreas, you mentioned, you know, sometimes senior leaders that are assholes are not caught because they are leading, they are managing their relationship. And I love Adam Grant. He used the phrase takers or fakers, you know, give and take, his theory, right? So there's the givers and the takers, and most takers are fakers. They know how to manage up. And I think it's a really important point that I was hoping someone will pick up on. But, you know, I really want to drive this point that, you know, the whole, especially in Asia where we don't speak up as often, it is so important that everyone in the organization, the only person that can tell you what's going on is the, you know, the people, okay? And that's why leadership assessment, they will tell you. You ask someone who's the asshole, they will all tell you within seconds. The issue is that, is top leadership really listening? Or is the person performing and solving? So I think that's a really important point, not only encouraging our employees to speak up, but listen between the lines on sometimes what's not being said because of cultural context here in Asia. That is absolutely critical. So I just wanted to thank you, Andres, for mentioning that. I think it's important.
Great.
Absolutely, yeah. And Gordon, I believe your hand is up as well. Did you want to come in on that?
It was just, so I agree with everything that Dahlia said. I was just going to reply to one of the comments that made that, you know, somebody said we should remember that people leave bosses, not companies. And I used to, when speaking at conferences, especially to leaders, I would start with the question, how many people have heard the phrase, people leave bosses, not companies? Every single hand goes up. How many people, keep your hand up, if you've had people leave you? And around 95% of the hands stay up. And then you ask the question, how many of them do you think left because of you? And 100% of the hands go down. And I think there's that lack of self-awareness of that if you're not aware that you have a problem, then how can you change? Yeah. And also to Dahlia's point, you know, we've got to make it safe for people to be able to complain. And I remember I went to one company and HR came to me and said, would you mind telling your boss he's toxic? I was like, am I now head of HR? Did I get a promotion I wasn't aware of? And they were afraid to go tell him. They were afraid to go tell him. And it's this fear that is, it's really toxic. And we just have to find to help raise that awareness and allow awareness to be raised by others in a safe way that allows us to act. Otherwise, it'll just fester and people leave.
Yeah, but Bernard, I know you have strong thoughts on creating a safe space where people can be open and honest without fear of reprisal. Maybe you want to say a few words.
Well, you know, I guess we stand on the shoulders of giants in this respect, and Amy Edmondson and Kim Scott and Radical Candor. You know, how we make it safe to discuss the undiscussable. How we make it safe for people to feel they are able to speak of, you know, more of their truth. And you know, how do we do that with care? And, you know, when we care, criticism enables learning. You know, uncaring criticism serves to weaken. So yeah, I just, and you know, the safety is, it's not something created for me, it's something created by me. And what I really encourage is for all leaders and followers to hold themselves with such respect and dignity and bring their truth, bring their voice. So yeah, unsafe environments, we know what happens. We render ourselves powerless in silence. Yeah. I just wanted to make a quick point, you know, Dean, coming back to the, you know, slow to hire, quick to fire. One of the whether it's an inconvenient truth of leadership is that, and I so believe this, if your people succeed, it's thanks to you. If they fail, it's because of you. And you know, if I have to be quick to fire, I'm the failure in that, not the candidate.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I was simply stating the phrase that's been whispered in my ear a number of times by very, very senior people. So a lot of people do live by that dogma, rightly or wrongly, but they do. So it is quite commonplace. And Andreas, did you want to come in on this?
I typed a couple of things over there, but I love it. Fear kills trust, and the moment trust develops, magic happens, right? Again, my point is, how can we create that awareness for whoever needs to make that decision that will allow the organization to move forward? I will put politics aside, and I will stay with organizations who have that true, genuine intention to understand what's going on in the organization and create that culture of trust, and that culture where people can speak up. And hopefully they can make the leaders who are in charge and responsible for teams and people to become more self-aware. I think there are two types there. It's the people who are truly in the blind side of the Johari window, and those who are in the hidden. If you're in the hidden, you pretend. You know where you suck, you know you're an asshole, but you don't do anything because of money, power, whatever else drives you. So you will manage upwards, you will never do anything. But if truly you are humble and you build that self-awareness, and it is your blind window that you're doing something wrong, you just don't know it, and you realize that, then you yourself will do whatever it takes to become better, and the organization will flourish. So the trick will be, how do the people who are responsible become aware, and they create that kind of culture of trust?
Yeah, I want to jump to Melody actually, and ask you, Melody, about the world of academia, which is extremely hierarchical, right, and sometimes rigid. Do you witness that lack of self-awareness in academia, in your colleagues or your peers, or has that world changed? Is it much more open, much more transparent, much more safe for people to kind of breach the hierarchical structures that kind of hold things in place?
It is always known as very political. So the university I was at before I came to North Central University was more of a traditional on the ground campus, and very political, very hierarchical. It was very difficult to, I guess, take on more responsibility to advance because you were kind of held back or held down. But when I came to North Central 4 years ago, I saw a completely different university, completely different climate. It's very open. We have, all of us work as virtual team members, so we're in that virtual space. We are a high performing team. We work really well. There's a lot of trust. We really work on developing relationships, which I think is super important in developing trust. So, and it's a very open, we are allowed to express our views without fear of reprisal. So I think, I can't speak for other universities, but I do know that at North Central, it's very open. And actually, I actually love it. I love the climate, love working with my colleagues. And I think this is, you know, it's true across, I'm in the school of business, but I think it's true across the university. So I think that, I hope that's a change. I hope that means that the higher ed is changing, but it's definitely open where I'm at.
Good to know, good to know. Here's to speaking your truth in a safe space. Let's hope we can all do that and all encourage others to do it too. So on that note, I think we are sadly out of time. A big thank you to our esteemed panel for giving us so much of their valuable time today. It's been an absolutely joyful evening full of insights for me and for all those that have tuned in as well, I'm sure. For the audience, do keep an eye on the web app, csuite.sg, to find out more about what we have coming down the line. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn to get updates. Also, please feel free to drop me an email at dean@csuite.sg, C-suite with a hyphen, if you have any feedback on tonight or indeed anything else C-suite related. For now, though, all that's left to do is to thank our esteemed guests one last time. So thank you, everyone on the panel. Let's have some virtual applause. And to say goodbye. So more from us soon. Bye for now, everyone, and thank you so much for your time this evening.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.